Hi guys, Dude here back with another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video, and today we're talking about the best floodgates that you can play in the game. So floodgates are certain kinds of cards that prevent you from playing a certain kind of playstyle or prevents you from actually playing certain cards at all. So these cards, honestly, I do not like them. They're pretty difficult to deal with, and most decks that run them are pretty annoying and really difficult to deal with. It's sometimes they're hard to remove, sometimes they're just they just stop you from playing the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. However, if your deck can play a floodgate, well, you're in luck because Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel gives you access to a ton of floodgates that are just really, really powerful, and some are a bit too broken, and some of these are also recently hit by the ban list. So, without further ado, let's check out the best floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So, this includes monster cards, spell cards, and even trap cards, which is the majority of the floodgates in the game. So, let's just run through a couple. First is Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo. So this card is when you summon this, when you put this on field, you neither player can special summon the monsters, so this allows you to just prevent your opponent from extending and using monsters from their extra deck, or even extending with their cards from their hand or from their deck. So they can't really summon anything. They can't special summon. So they can only normal summon and hope they have a monster that can beat this over at 1200 attack. That's usually an easy ask, but taking this out means that you have to waste the battle phase to get this out. This is a really decent floodgate monster. Maybe the go attack might be just easy for it to be to out, but it's gonna be difficult. So I forgot to include one monster here that should be here. Anyway, so next up we have Inspector Border. So Inspector Border is one of those UR floodgate cards that are high investment but are really powerful when at the right deck. So Inspector Border basically locks you out from activating monster effects, and this prevents you from much like Fossil Dino, it prevents you from extending your combos, prevents you from activating more monster effects. Usually you can only activate one of each type, but most decks stick to a certain type of extra deck monster, so this is really difficult. And at 2000 attack and defense, this is pretty difficult to out if you don't have a decent normal summon to get this out. So, really difficult. Next up is the barrier statue. So, barrier statue of Stormwinds, or let's just say um every barrier statue. So, barrier statue of the torrents, of the droughts, of the heavens, of the abyss, and of the inferno. So these barrier statues prevent you from special summoning monsters except for monsters of a certain attribute. So Fluanderies and Tri Brigade Lyrilusk use this a lot because they can easily summon barrier statue of Stormwinds and actually easily search it as well for Fluanderies, and prevents players from special summoning monsters except wind monsters. So this is kind of broken. Some decks can search the other statues also pretty easily, so this is really difficult. So if you're if you want a floodgate that prevents your opponents from special summoning certain types and lock them into a type that you use, this is pretty good. So barrier statue, these are SR, so these are pretty easy to get, and um while they may die to a normal summon monster because of their 1000 attack and defense, they can still do a good amount of damage and slow you down regardless. So Next up, we have the Zombie World package. So this is usually 1 to 2 Zombie World and 1 Necro World Banshee. Necro World Banshee is just there for when you can instantly banish her from field or graveyard to activate Zombie World from deck, which is really cool. So Zombie World is a pretty interesting floodgate because all monsters in the field and in the graveyard become zombie monsters, and neither player can tribute summon monsters except zombie monsters. If you're looking a card that can really stop Fluanderies in Master Duel, which is a really powerful deck running rampant in the format, Zombie World pretty much kills them because they can't tribute summon their big wing beast monsters like Empen, Apex Avian, and Rise of the Mega Monarch. It's really difficult for them to do that because they can't tribute someone for wing beast monsters and can only tribute someone for zombie monsters. So that's really difficult. So Zombie World, of course, is the best in zombie decks, but you can also use this to prevent your opponent from playing a certain type. And if your summons only rely on a certain attribute like light, dark, wind, water, you can actually play this and um do your combos uninterrupted with the right deck. So yeah, Necroworld, Banshee, and Zombie World are pretty powerful. You can also add a Doom King Balor drop for this. Really powerful card. Next up, Secret Village of the Spellcasters. This is an annoying floodgate that's usually used by spellcaster decks. So if only you control a spellcaster monster, your opponent cannot activate spell cards. So for the most part, decks like Dark Magician and Witchcrafter use this, and even Pendulum Magicians use this. So um basically it protects them from get their cards getting destroyed by spell cards, and opponents cannot activate spell cards. So that means you cannot start your plays unless you have a spellcaster monster on your deck or on the field. So that's really annoying. So whenever you get hit by this, it's pretty painful. So just keep in mind that this is a really scary card to deal with, and make sure you remove this as soon as possible. But if you're using a spellcaster deck, keeping this up on the field allows you to just take advantage, take control of the entire matchup with just one field spell, and that's really powerful. Next up is Kaiser Colosseum. So the effect of this card is a bit complicated, but to make it simpler, essentially the opponent cannot place a monster that's more than the number of monsters you have on the field. So it's pretty complicated, but it prevents opponents from summoning even more. Some people see this card as a bit wonky for a floodgate, but this is pretty cool. So this is a pretty decent floodgate. Some decks can take advantage of this, especially decks that don't special summon too much, like Sky Striker. They only usually have one Sky Striker ace monster in the field, so they can really take advantage of this. And it's also SR, so easy to obtain. Next up is Dimensional Fissure. Dimensional Fissure um, is a floodgate where any monster sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So this is pretty powerful because a lot of decks right now rely on their graveyard effects. So if their cards can't go enter the graveyard, some of their effects are pretty much dead. There are some decks that benefit from being banished, so that's one thing, like Flaunderies and Thunder Dragon, but most decks rely on having a decent graveyard setup. So Dimensional Fissure really wrecks that. So if you're running something like maybe Orcus, where Orcus needs to start their combos by putting their monsters in the graveyard, they can't really do that under Dimensional Fissure. But if you're running a deck like Exo Sister of Wanderies, you can play this and prevent your opponent from setting up too many plays. Okay. Next up, Dimensional Barrier. So Dimensional Barrier is unique here because it is a one-turn floodgate, essentially. So Dimensional Barrier, when you flip it up, declare one monster card type, Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Pendulum. And for the rest of the turn, your opponent can not special summon monsters of the declare type. Even you'd the one using it, so you can't really use the monster type you declared. And they cannot activate their effects if ever they are on the field. So Dimensional Barrier is a very popular side deck card in TCG, OCG, and in Master Duel tournaments. This is also very much in side decks, or some people have enough space to main deck this, and this is pretty nasty. So Dimensional Barrier, if you're looking for like a floodgate that's universal that can be used in most decks, this is pretty good. Especially if you're like a going first deck that just wants to have extra protection when you're setting up your board. After setting up your board is pretty good. Next up, we have Anti-Spell Fragrance. So Anti-Spell Fragrance is basically SR Imperial Order and Anti-Spell Fragrance. Basically, both players must set spell cards before activating them, and they cannot activate them until the next turn. So basically, anti-spell fragrance turns your spell cards into very very slow trap cards. So most strategies die to this. Most decks die to this because they need to activate their spell cards as soon as possible, and they can't do that under anti-spell fragrance. So this is still a very powerful floodgate, and if your deck doesn't rely too much on spell cards, and it's a more trap heavy focus deck like maybe Trap Tricks or Eldritch or Dynamorphia, this one can really work and it's really powerful. Next up, Rivalry of Warlords. So Rivalry of Warlords is a floodgate that locks you into one type of monster. So each player can only control one type, and if you have another type on field, send all the other face-up monsters they control to the graveyard. This includes your monsters that are of different types. So if you have a deck that focuses on playing a single type of monster, this is pretty powerful because you can just lock your opponent out of extending or summoning anything else unless they're also using a single type, which is pretty common. So Rivalry of Warlords is pretty good against certain matchups. But sometimes there are decks that rely on having just one type. So this is a pretty double-edged sword. But when you flip this over, this is usually really powerful because it really slows down a lot of decks as well. Next up, we have Skill Drain. So the infamous Skill Drain. So basically, when this is flipped over, monster effects are negated. So this basically slows down the game. This is pretty much an Eldritch staple, no matter which Eldritch variant it usually is. So Skill Drain basically slows down the entire game to a crawl, preventing you from activating monster effects that can allow you to search spells or allow you to extend. So really, really powerful. All at the cost of just 1,000 life points, which is really crazy. Now that this is a 2, it's a bit less consistent that you can draw this off the rip going first. But still, Skill Drain is a really powerful floodgate. And at SR, once again, very affordable. If you notice the trend, a lot of the really good floodgates are super rare, so that says something. And it's, if you're a budget player, if you're you don't want to spend too much ultra rare gems here, you can just play more floodgates, although people wouldn't like you for doing that. So next up, we have Macrocosmos. Macrocosmos kind of works like Dimension Fisher, and basically this any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. So this this is another card that prevents you from using your graveyard, and it will hurt and slow down most strategies. So that's really difficult. And Macrocosmos has an often forgotten effect where you can summon Helios the Primordial Sun, but you don't really need that. All you want from this card is its Floodgate effect, where any card sent to the graveyard is banished, which is really, really, really powerful. Next up is Summon Limit. Summon Limit is basically neither player can summon more than 2 times, so whether it be 2 normal summons, 2 special summons, beyond that, you cannot do anything. So this is pretty powerful, especially on decks that do not need too many summons, or you can use this after you set up your combo, flip this on draw phase against your opponent, and they can't really respond too much to whatever you set up. So summon limit is also SR really powerful floodgate here. Next up, Imperial Iron Wall. So most decks right now, apart from using the graveyard, they also rely on banishing certain cards to activate effects. So Imperial Iron Wall prevents that, where and uh prevents both players from banishing cards actually. So this is pretty powerful. And if your deck doesn't care about banishing cards, this is pretty good to use, and this allows you to just dominate most matchups when you flip this up, especially against like Fluanderies, which needs to have their stuff banished to continue their combos. Next up, Gozen Match. So Gozen Match is like Reveille of Warguards, except you're locked to a certain attribute of a monster. So if you're running like water, light, dark, or wind, you can just flip this over and your opponent can't play different types. If your opponent plays monsters of a single type, that's fine. They can play through this easily, but most decks right now use different attributes, so this is really a difficult task to play through. So Gozen Match usually stops a lot of strategies as well. So it's really powerful, and if you can use this in something like a water deck or like Trilirigas deck, which has wind monsters, this will stop your opponent really hard. And lastly, there can be only one. So there can be only one is kind of like Revelry Forgards, except that each player can only control one monster of each type. So you can control multiple types, but you can only have one of them on the field. So if you have like a machine monster and a fiend monster, you can only have one of each in the on the field. And if a player controls two or more, they must send some of them to the graveyard. So this is another strong floodgate. While this is a floodgate that some most decks can play through a bit more because you can summon an extra type. This will really slow down a lot of strategies, like something like Sword Soul, because all of their cards are worms. It will really slow them down, or maybe like Fluanderies, where they only have winged beast monsters, which they can only summon one. After that, they're just stumped. So that which is really difficult. So the only downside of there can be only one is that it is a UR floodgate, so that's really difficult to get compared to the other super rare floodgates here. It's the most expensive one. But yeah, overall, these are the best floodgates in Master Duel. I know most people don't like playing this strategy, but this is something that you can use if your deck has space for floodgates, can play through your own floodgates. This is pretty good to have. But for now, this is it. And if you have any suggestions on other floodgates that you're using, you can leave it at the comment section below. If you like this video, you can be sure to leave a like or share the video and subscribe to the channel. That would be really awesome to help the channel grow and help me help give me more support when as I make more Master Duel content in the near future. But that's it for this video, and once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. So goodbye.